providing her insurance to the end. And when it got to the point where she could have had maybe incredibly expensive surgery, which might have bought her a month or two, I was very happy with the hospice approach. She was tired of being old and in pain, and so the cooperative model worked very well in her instance. The problem in the pure corporate model is that those people who can afford to go to a foreign country and buy body parts harvested in South Asia, just as an example, because I know of someone like this, and still ended up passing away. They could do that because they had very deep pockets, and unfortunately, in topics like healthcare, cooperative efforts really make sense. And at its core, I think the Obama administration healthcare model has some validity to it because it attempts to level everybody, lumping those that cannot pay in with those that can afford to buy new body parts on a regular basis, and saying, okay, we're going to try and cost average all this stuff across, and we'll see how that works out. I am skeptical because I think there is so much resistance, going back to what I said earlier about people are already distrustful of the amount of government intrusion into their lives, and are we going to take, at what point does the healthcare, or does the intrusiveness of government into your life become unacceptable? Obviously, it isn't when it comes to schools. It isn't when it comes to pollution controls. It isn't when it comes to income tax. It isn't when it comes to a number of other things, student loans. But when we get into health care, that's starting to get real personal, and that's right in that same league with owing the government a mortgage, which is effectively what happened in the former Soviet Union. They had rents. They didn't get necessarily free housing. And so, once again, it's just remonetizing the system, which is why we have a tremendous job ahead of us all if we're to move forward in a world which does not operate in a strictly monetarized way where he who has the gold makes the rules. And unfortunately, that is the world of today. The problem is the gold is unequally distributed. You and I don't have enough. And those that have lots more than all of us combined are not inclined to share it in a meaningful way because they wish to promote what I call the American aristocracy, which is those people in the upper the upper 5% of American income structure that wants to preserve its role as being the modern day aristocrats hiding under the guise of constitutional republic.
Okay, thanks, George. We're now going on to the Terra entity questions. Uranus, you have a question for George.
Yes. George, what are your thoughts about Cliff's latest theory, that of the expando planet? Do you believe in the doom as much as he does? And if so, has this theory had any impact on your preps?
Well, a couple of things. First, do I believe in expando planet? Yes. The reason I believe in expando planet is it makes a lot of sense because we all know Einstein's equation is E equals mc squared. Therefore, mass ought to be able to be created if you had enough energy over enough time. And the Earth is certainly a great big solar energy collector, and it's been here a very long time. So it would make sense that the radiant energy from the sun and the actinics and the non-visual energy, the radio energy and so forth, all that stuff, could certainly create matter. So that intuitively seems to make sense. Has that had any impact on my preparations? Yes, because it got me to do a lot of research on EMP electromagnetic pulse problems. And sitting in my office is a rather prominent metal garbage can that has a ham radio, an HF ham radio, as well as a little computer, which I know that it will survive anything I'm going to survive in terms of EMP from the sun or anything else for that matter. So I take that solar part of Terra incredibly seriously. Now, as to how bad it gets, that's a different matter. I have read a number of papers by NASA experts on the Carrington event and other coronal mass ejections. They seem to happen at the top or slightly after the top of a solar cycle. But not necessarily, and there's no guarantees with the sun. And you saw that internal flex currents were just announced in the last week as being the cause for the solar minima and solar maxima periods. It looks at this point like we're into at least a Dalton minimum, which is relatively small and may only last 1 or 2, perhaps 3 or 4 solar cycles, maybe 40, 50 years. But the shape of the current solar cycle does not preclude us from being in a Maunder minimum, which makes it kind of a big, ugly mess to try and figure out how to prepare for it. Because with a Maunder minimum, you get global cooling, which causes contraction of the surface of the Earth, which could trigger earthquakes, presumably. And I think you've seen there's a reader of mine, Tony Ring, and I put it on the Urban Survival site every month, has those dandy earthquake charts. And you can see there's very clearly a trend for the past, 10 years or so in the magnitude 6, magnitude 7s. They've been increasing. Whether that is due to, and it also, by the way, seems to have a 22-year period to it when you look at it as a fifth-order polynomial. Not that you want to run right out and do that, but I'm just saying that there appears to be some periodicity to the earthquakes that seems to be related to the sun, and the expando planet discussion certainly makes sense. It's been kicked around that there's this convertibility of sun energy into matter, and that may in fact be one of the great mechanisms of how the whole universe operates. We just don't know because we're just dumb humans and haven't got it all figured out yet. In terms of my own preps, I've spent more money on some very high speed electrical transient protection devices. So my solar panels, my inverter, my car, my tractor, my backup generator. I tried to install one on my wife last week. She wouldn't stand still for it, but nevertheless, yes, we do take that seriously.
Thank you, George. Very much, George.
Dead Poet, you've got a question for George.
Yeah, you've actually addressed some of the solar possibilities and the EMPs, and there's so many possibilities of pole shifts and all these things, and we talk about this, especially on the forum all the time. Do you and this is just something I like to look at Cliff's work and look at his specific brackets and just sort of look at it in a certain way. But do you think that the new electrics that he picks up on, do you think that could have anything to do with a change in polar magnetism? As in, we'll have to sort of birth new electronics in order to combat the magnetic changes that are going on the Earth?
I don't think so. I think that the new electrics may have come out this past week. You saw, I presume, I think the story was out of the Philippines. Some guy has now got a car driven by a 12-volt battery that just keeps running and recharging itself. I don't know if you've seen that or not. But there are a number of devices which are being demonstrated informally that are very, very close to this over unity stuff. I think that's the bulk of the new electrics. Now, whether there are other new electrics such as electrolevitation or other effects. We don't know yet, but I expect that we'll see that kind of thing too.
Thank you, George. Roman, do you have a question for George?
Yes, George, I just wondered what your gut feel was for what's happening with all the language swirling around about the New Madrid fault. Like, for instance, the government putting out for quote for all those millions of meals. And also, do you think it would be a false flag type situation?
Well, I think government doesn't do things without due consideration. If I were a consultant in strategic planning to the government, I would suggest that between the potential for an unusual, if not record-breaking, string of weather events because of what we've seen in Australia, because of the potential for an extraordinary spring with regard to tornadoes and mass destruction, because of potential crop losses and loading on the planet, because of New Madrid, because of the threat of EMP. It would only take a couple of EMP devices at the 200-kilometer level overhead to put the U.S. effectively in the dark, and with other potentials like Long Valley Caldera, Yellowstone. One of these is going to pop someday. So, given that, when do you lay in your supply of food, especially if you could put it someplace where it could be in a temperature-controlled environment? I don't know how many MREs you've got stored, but there's a nice little chart. An MRE at 70 or 60 degrees will store for like 12 years. If it's at 80 degrees, it's like 3 years, and if it's 90 degrees, I think it's like 2. So storage temperatures mean something. Given that, and given that food was relatively cheaper when the government started looking, I'm not sure I read anything particularly ominous into it, although there's an NLE, a national level exercise planned by FEMA later on this spring, as if a New Madrid were going to occur. Not saying they know anything about it, but we've had a lot of activity in Arkansas. Some speculate and some worry that that could be a new volcano trying to erupt, and that with the pressure off of the south end of that whole continental fault structure, with the oil being pricked out of that asphalt bubble down in the Gulf of Mexico, that it's possible that we could see some rather large crustal-type movement. How big it would be compared to the 1812 event, anybody's guess. Is it prudent, though, given the possibilities of social unrest, floods, terror, EMP, solar whatever, or ice age to stock up food? Yeah, it doesn't strike me as a paranoid thing to do. It strikes me as an